All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We're going to trade the glittering marble of the Forum for something a little more authentic. The gritty, rhythmic soundtrack of Rome's ancient working class. You know, when we usually picture the ancient world, it's so easy to get totally lost in the grand architecture and those epic, sweeping battles. But today we're looking at the relentless, repetitive labor that actually kept that massive civilization functioning day in and day out.
It's wild how much the cinematic glamour we're used to completely masks the gritty reality. I mean, if you woke up in a high-density neighborhood like the Subura, you definitely weren't dreaming of golden chariots or glory in the Colosseum. Your morning reality was more of a fragrant symphony. We're talking thick charcoal smoke, the incredibly pungent smell of street vendor garum, basically fermented fish sauce, and the heavy scent of unwashed wool from thousands of laborers packed together. It was this intense, crowded world that required constant, absolutely grueling maintenance just to survive.
Section 1. Fighting fire with vinegar. So let's start our sensory journey right there in those cramped alleys of the Subura. Imagine waking up in the dead of night to the absolute worst sound possible, the cry of fire in a multi-story wooden tinderbox. To handle these disasters, Rome relied on the Vigiles. That was their urban fire brigade. But scratch that image of brave heroes pulling up with high-tech sirens. Instead, think of them more like the overcaffeinated IT guys of the ancient emergency world. They were just out there constantly trying to optimize a desperate bucket brigade before an entire city block turned to ash. They dealt with these finicky Roman pumps and water systems that, much like modern tech, honestly, never seemed to work quite right when you need it the most.
Now, the specialists assigned to operate those pumps, the Siphonarii, were called the Siphonarii. In their reality, definitely not an action movie sequence. It was just a rhythmic, exhausting splash over and over. Imagine the heavy thud of water hitting scorched timber, accompanied by this constant, eerie hiss of steam rising into the dark night sky. It wasn't glorious. It was a relentless, grinding loop of carrying heavy, sloshing water buckets up crumbling apartment stairs.
But what happens when those pumps inevitably fail, or the water just runs low? Well, that's when the Siphonarii stepped in. These specialists had to rely on a completely different and frankly terrifying tactic. Armed with literally nothing but heavy wool blankets soaked in vinegar and just pure, unfiltered stubbornness, their job was to physically smother the flames by hand.
Let's really put ourselves in that sensory loop for a second, because it was brutal. First, you're lugging these massive buckets up crumbling, burning stairs. Then you're breathing in the incredibly sharp, stinging scent of hot vinegar as it hits the fire. You're bearing the immense physical weight of that sodden wool, all while suffering the itchy, inescapable reality of hot ash clinging to your sweaty skin. In that moment, you weren't some glorious hero of Rome. You were just a regular person with a bucket, desperately trying to stay hydrated while feeling like you were auditioning for some unforgiving sky god.
Section 2. The slow-motion battering ram. Okay, moving from the fiery city streets to the enemy gates, let's explore the highly repetitive yet strangely theatrical side of Roman destruction. If you ever found yourself assigned to operate the Aries, you'd have to cast aside that screaming Hollywood charge we all picture. Operating this massive Roman battering ram, which was basically a giant tree trunk suspended by heavy chains inside a wheeled wooden shelter, was actually a remarkably slow-paced, repetitive grind. It was more like a rhythmic hammer from the heavens, rather than a swift, chaotic strike.
Seriously, this machine was pure, concentrated willpower rendered in wood and iron. It was the ultimate form of architectural stubbornness, specifically designed to convince these massive, impenetrable stone walls that they were nothing more than temporary obstacles in the path of Rome's fate.
And the sensory experience of a siege? Completely immersive and totally exhausting. You would spend hours trapped inside that rolling wooden shelter. You breathe in the overwhelming, gross smell of wet animal hides draped over the roof to prevent fire. You listen to the agonizing, high-pitched creak of the winches. You and your comrades would swing the ram in the slow motion, almost sedative pulse. And with every single strike, you would feel the deep, heavy thunk of wood against stone vibrating right through your very bones. That slow, rhythmic pulse? That was the exact sound that ultimately marked the end of an empire.
Section 3. Building the empire's spine.
Now, to keep those firefighters hydrated and those massive siege engines moving across entire continents, we have to look at the vital foundation of it all. Every single day, highly trained Roman legionaries traded their swords for spades. They effectively became heavily armed construction workers. Think about that for a second. This wasn't some grand journey of military glory. It was a relentless, daily grind to physically dig, move rock, and build the very spine of the empire from the dirt up.
Just imagine the daily hardships compounding, detail by detail. Picture carrying a 60-pound sarcina, your incredibly heavy military pack, literally all day long. Your marching soundtrack is just the rhythmic, dusty thud of Caligay, your leather sandals, striking volcanic gravel over and over and over. When it was finally time to eat, you'd be negotiating with a leather sandal of a breakfast, coarse bread filled with uninvited minerals like sand and millstone grit. And then, you'd crawl into a leather tent on a prickly straw pallet in Gaul, sleeping as part of a human lasagna of sweaty comrades. When morning came, you'd wake up with your back shaped like a question mark, dreaming only of a world where your feet didn't ache.
Section 4. Stubborn Survivors of History.
As we wrap up this explainer, I think it becomes so clear that beneath those beautiful, pristine marble facades we all admire in museums today, humanity has always been a collection of stubborn survivors working in the grit. These everyday stories of splashing water, thunking rams, and dusty roads show us exactly who actually built the world. They endured the plagues, the punishments, and the terrible pottage of the past so that we could literally be the end result of their grit. Even in the blinding smoke of the Subura and the choking dust of those ever-expanding roads, these ancient laborers were the true architects of a legacy. They proved that despite the absolute hardest conditions, human beings will always try to build something that lasts.
I'll leave you with this final provocative thought to ponder tonight. When you consider the immense physical toll, that rhythmic splashing, the back-breaking lifting, and the sheer absolute stubbornness our ancestors endured just to keep their world functioning, what kind of lasting legacy are you building through your own rhythmic grind today?